All right, let me tell my peoples. I want to. It was going on Jubilee. Um. So yeah, I did want to talk on this topic because I thought it was pretty interesting, based off what you had posted earlier. Um. In relation to Native Americans and ICE. But what was your take on it that you had displayed? You put a whole thread up that was about this particular topic.
Yeah, so basically, so I found it interesting. So there's a common thread amongst Black Americans that people may not know that where a lot of us have quote unquote, there's a lot of different names for it depending on, especially um, where your family descends from. But there are a lot of us who have Native American slash American Indian heritage, and that is usually found out by way of genealogy. So in the midst of all this Trump stuff, the 14th Amendment, and people kind of like arguing over that whether or not it applies to those who are descendants or children of slaves and people who are just quote unquote undocumented immigrants. So I keep seeing the headlines saying people, Donald Trump is trying to deport Native Americans, this and that. I thought it was just kind of like another, just another headline. But I looked into it, and it really was true that, excuse me, that there was Native Americans or people who belong to Native American tribes that were being quote unquote harassed, detained, possibly deported. So I was like, damn, is that? I'm like, the first thing that came to my mind is like, wow, they're really, kind of like just harassing these people or not so quote unquote harassing them, but kind of like targeting them or have a more hyper focus on them because of their phenotype, right? They usually look close to what we consider people who are Mexican or from Latin America, or whatever. So I was like, that's very interesting. So I watched a couple of videos where I think a representative of the Navajo Nation said what she had to say, and then I read a couple articles. And what I noticed is people people I notice always bring up the idea of the passport, right? So what is the passport versus the state issued ID? So is definitely um representative of you as a citizen, right? So I noticed that that people kept advising keep your driver's license on you, keep your state ID on you. They kept mentioning state ID stuff. So that's when I just figured. I said, wait a minute, there might be something here. Like, is it possible for an undocumented immigrant to be considered a part of a Native American nation? And the reason my mind went to that is because I had already done some research about the idea of not the idea, but the process of being admitted into these tribal nations and things. Because what I notice is that when people, when it comes to Black Americans, and forgive me if I'm going on, but when it comes to Black Americans,
No,
people,
you can keep going.
yeah, when it comes to us, people, say, you're not indigenous simply because they pretty much associate us or our background with quote unquote this idea of African ancestry.
Yeah.
But when it comes to people who are of a certain phenotype, they kind of grant them the the freedom to identify as an indigenous solely based
Right.
on their phenotype,
Right.
right?
Right.
So now what we're seeing is this is kind of like old bones washing up upon shore after a flood, because this ties directly to how they pretty much set up their requirements or criteria for membership. There was a time
Right. It's how
where
they've been operating.
exactly it's so fast forward to now, it's become somewhat of a vessel for other people to attach themselves onto it. Meanwhile, our ancestors were outcasted from those said tribes. But yeah, but just to pretty much wrap it up, it's possible that excuse me, it's possible. I already knew that it's possible for a person to be admitted into a tribe and have official tribal affiliation
Hmm.
without being actually born of that culture or that lineage. You know what I'm saying? The membership to tribal affiliation is completely up to the discretion of that tribe. So when people tell us you don't have a tribe, what's your culture? You don't have any membership. You're not accepted into their nation. Well, it's like, yeah, that's true, but even the people who are granted access into those tribes aren't quote unquote indigenous. They can get in just by way of marriage, just proximity, whatever the case may be. So now we're seeing that this system of where they have kind of like, I call it race based tribalism.
Hmm.
Um, this system is kind of like backfiring now, where these people have been granted, kind of like cover in these Native American enclaves, but Native American citizenship, I mean, Native American affiliation doesn't equal to U.S. citizenship.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's what we're finding out here. Is that exact point, and it's very interesting when you think about it because, yeah, the fact that they would grant anybody affiliation, um, is just, I'm native and I say so. Right now at this point, and it kind of honestly was like that even before, but it wasn't just like filtered through some type of documentation that's fake anyway, because they didn't start documenting uh, Native Americans, or who could be affiliated with such, until white people got involved, until white governments and white laws got involved. There was no documentation of saying who was who. It was just through societal acceptance. That's the same thing that went through when it came to tribalism, when it came to Indians. Indian was just a general nomer given to the entire landscape and population of people found on a landmass, um, and then the tribal affiliation of them was just through societal acceptance. If I wanted to marry you or if I wanted to accept you in, that's just what it was. Then they started going into the Dawes Rolls and other documentation that they purged a lot of people from in the first place. And then they wanted to now go forward with having that documentation after you purged thousands of people, mainly Solon. And then one thing I never researched or cared to research, I guess, like that, because I assumed it was what it was the blood quantum levels, right? They would talk about blood quantum, and so you made it a point in your thread to say exactly what blood quantum means now in 2025, or I don't know when it changed, but but you would think that it would be pertaining to exactly what it says, blood, which would be like DNA, which I already understood that before 2000, we had no understanding of DNA. So blood quantum didn't really make too much of a sense anyway. I just figured maybe it was just about possible, um, just who you're married to and who you had kids with to some degree, because of course DNA would have been a thing in the 1900s and the 1800s. Come to find out, what was it? You go ahead. You know what it was? You put it in.
Well, I was just gonna say what's funny is that, so when we think of this idea of blood or relation, ancestry, things like that, we have we have a very we're very far from the understanding the average person is. I believe, like, it's pretty complex, right?
Right.
But um, people have emotional ties to their sense of identity, and that's usually routed through some their idea of ancestry. So I when I when I when I looked up, what does it take to be a part of these Native American tribes, and they say, it's by way of, their, of course, it's up to their discretion or criteria that they come up with. But one of the things they named was blood quantum. So when you think, like, again, blood, DNA, genetics, right?
Right.
And then you look up how do they prove? How does one prove their blood quantum is Indian blood?
Right.
And the answer is through genealogy.
Right.
So what
Right.
so basically this is a path, a direct path back to the 1800s, 1700s, to where they simply based it on lookerism, where they said
Right.
you we from now on this particular phenotype is what is to be only represents what is a Native American.
Hmm.
So that's originally what it comes from. It's funny because people always, the first thing people want to say, well, if you do a DNA test, not realizing the Native American tribes, most of them don't even use, they don't participate in that. They never have. So it's kind of ironic that people would even, kind of use that, but
I got a
there's
study
no
that says
basis for
none of
that.
them do.
Right. I don't think so.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I actually
if
don't
I'm
think
giving a
so.
little bit of leg room, we'll say mostly none of them. But I'm hearing that in a study that none of them do. But I mean, that's just I
That
don't
that
know.
would make sense actually. I'm just trying to be a
Yeah.
little open minded, but
Right.
that would actually make more sense. Like there's just no way. Once you understand the science behind it, at least at the surface level, there's just no way to tie
Hmm.
specific ethnicity to quote unquote blood quantum.
And plus, it wouldn't make sense anyway, honestly, because like us, like a lot of Latin Americans, like Native Americans, we are a vastly highly admixed population and group. So why do I say that? I say that because when you're talking about DNA within highly admixed population, it's hard to um, find their origin, so to speak, because with every passing generation, the oldest DNA gets smaller and smaller and uh and harder or if not impossible to find because you got to think of it. So say if we had a cylinder of different color of sand and I put red at the bottom and I keep putting more and more different colors on top on top on top on top, you can't see the red at the bottom because by the time we're reaching the red, um, that's far beyond the scope of what we can find at this point. We're not getting to the origin of it, so we can't use Native Americans as some type of holy grail for who they are when they don't. You can't even figure out who they are either, as far as an origin story is concerned through the genetic level.
E- Exactly. And you know what's funny, through my research, and I want to be able to articulate it much better the more I research, but from my understanding, there is no such thing as um, genetic separation amongst humans, and that is in concordance with phenotype, if that makes sense.
Right? Yeah.
So
Genotype does not equal phenotype.
exactly. So it's just funny that we have this, because even I kind of believed it myself, and until I started doing research, and I realized, to be honest, the only way the identity of a people exists is if there's a culture that is behind that identity, right? So
Hmm.
so when we talk about our certain ancestors and things like that, like unless you're pinpointing a particular culture, that person doesn't exist, and that is why the annihilation of culture is so important. So all this stuff connects. I'm sure we got a lot to talk about, but all of this stuff directly connects, where they pretty much they've been switching people out the whole time, and that's the other thing, that going back to DNA testing, you can't reliably depend that someone is like exactly from a landmass, because humans move all the time. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like on average, humans migrate every 3 to 5 generations on end. So when they set the genetic markers for like 23andMe or whatever database they use for those ancestry tests, what they do is they go to the region and they interview people who at least have 3 generations at least, and they they determine from there. They say, okay, they look at genealogical records and they say, okay, we deem this person as being what we consider Nigerian in this particular region, and they set the markers there. So it's this idea of blood being infused with land masses is just it's blown out of proportion, and it's one day I think we'll be looking back at it as like a flat Earth type thing.
Yeah, it's definitely funny as hell because then you realize too. I put in the jumbotron in response to your thread. I'm not going to get to the main point just yet, but in the comments, I made it abundantly clear that off of what I said, you realize in these DNA tests, such as 23andMe or these other pools of DNA databases for companies, you notice that they couple three different continents to make sense of origin for one. So what I posted in response to you was showing that Native American or America, North America, South America, and Asia, three different continents, are all shaving. I'm sorry. They're all sharing Native American DNA apparently. So imagine that. Imagine three different continents sharing the same DNA, and we're all supposed to believe that. We're all supposed to believe that. And for some reason, and like you said, it's all pointing to phenotype, right? If we're all going by phenotype, well, you can say that there's phenotypical similarities between Black Americans and the Negritos and also the Melanesians and Australasians, but you don't see them having a shared phenotype between their particular places on different land masses between three different continents. It's not the same thing because there's a game being played here. So we have to recognize what's really being played here, and that um, yeah, the truth isn't always being displayed here.
I'll say this, and we'll
Mr. X, you
hope.
can come up if you want. My bad, I was reading something.
Yeah, I'll say this, and we'll put a pin in it, and hopefully it'll make sense in the end. But I believe there is an effort to minimize the perception of people of a certain phenotype.
Yes.
Like they want people who are the so-called Negroid phenotype to be completely flattened and homogenized to shrink our presence on this earth. Like that, it's really a psycho religious belief that they have that they will be annihilated somehow. So that fear has dispersed into an entire world culture. So that's kind of what I believe. Hopefully, I don't know if it'll veer off into that, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, but Rafa Sadiq, he went around and he made it abundantly clear that there was black people all over the earth. They became quite jealous and quite envious when they seen that there were black people every corner of the earth. So that, of course, was probably want to speak to them in ways in which it was going to have a built up anger because they've already had experience and gone through uh, the expulsion of the Moors at the time. A lot of jealousy involved in that whole um, race quantum or phenotypical quantum thing that they went through as well. So I do want to touch on a couple of different things as well, but I'm gonna get to Mr. X. Go ahead.
Yeah, peace, bro. I just wanted to come up because you seem like you're real knowledgeable on the DNA side of the native stuff. Because I've just got into like studying myself,
Yep.
um, and I've when you study like when I'm doing and trying to go into the actual things, but you don't have a background and all this stuff, it's kind of like difficult to get through the surface because on the surface, like they'll tell you that after Lucia burned down in the museum that they finally decided to do a DNA test on her, and she came back with a D haplogroup. Um, so I was um, basically taking that and saying, I do believe that because of the morphology of the skulls and everything, that there were definitely black people over here in the Americas, but just from like the DNA and things of that nature, I feel like in order for that group to be us, we would have to have a majority uh majority uh D haplogroup or native admixture mixed in with African if we were the Aboriginal people.
Okay, let me speak on that. Thank you so much, X. Let me speak on that for a second because so yeah, when we're talking about DNA, and I'll talk about Lucia woman for a second too. I seen someone talking in Tariq spaces the past few days, and this is the thing, they're lying about Lucia woman and the archaeologist consensus on her, um because that was never debunked, and it can't be debunked because UNESCO and NCBI and Nature, all of these widely acceptable and scholarly databases that come to a consensus in peer review, they're all codifying the fact that Lucia woman was a black woman. Not only that, but also that the black morphology was dominant and persisted well until about the mid Holocene. There was no morphological change until about 6,000 BC. That's given anything. And even then, it was a slow process, a very slow process. That was the beginning of it. And white people definitely didn't exist 6,000 BC yet. There was no rampant albinism breakthrough in that way. So we're talking about morphology in that way, and then we're talking about DNA. But let's talk about the DNA and the haplogroup thing. The haplogroup thing is a grift. Bougie will get to you in a second. Um, the haplogroup thing is a grift to a certain degree. They decide whatever algorithm they want to put whoever in at any point in time. They've already admitted this with the Moors. I can send you the study, Mr. X. They've completely removed the Moors and their DNA and said that they moved the algorithm over into European. And yes, that would probably be correct if they were in Europe for 700 years. But what's also incorrect about that is that it gives the assumption that they're white. So we have to understand that all DNA and all mutations are all black. Why are they all black? Because they're all chronologically all tens of thousands of years old. So if they're all tens of thousands of years old, then that means there was no morphological change yet. Because again, all morphological change happens at 6,000 BC, if that. So we got to be clear about mutation. So that whole haplogroup thing or what have you doesn't really stand a chance here when we're talking about DNA and corroboration to morphology or landmass with people. Also, we have to understand that when we're talking about DNA or in landmass does not determine DNA. So we got to be clear about that. Um, you can landmass doesn't determine that. So and also Black Americans, so long we don't have a founder's effect, which means that we weren't forced to have any type of founder event or any type of big bottleneck
It
event,
was like an organic formation,
organic
pretty much,
formation
right?
that didn't really need or require anybody to have a mutation. So we can very much persist without a mutation. Just because one particular person had a mutation that said D doesn't mean the vast majority of everybody else also had D. So let's be clear. I'll let you respond to that if you want to as well.
Yeah, well, I wanted to speak to the haplogroup thing because you know, like I said, I'm still learning and growing too, and that's why I'm so appreciative of finding people on this app that just are interested because we can share and hear stuff. But in doing my research, what I like to do is I like to question the terms that we accept, right? So what that means is haplogroups. We have to question where did they, when and where and how did they devise these quote unquote groups, right? And if you go back, the furthest I got to getting a background on haplogroups was dating back to I think it's like 1987 or something like that. Nature magazine, they did a study on on how the mitochondrial DNA was within everyone. And what they did was they took the placenta of various people and they took it from, I think it was 20 quote unquote black women, right? two of them from sub-Saharan Africa, 18 of them Black American. And they said that these women had their carbon DNA was and carbon DNA, by the way, is when they kind of like test the age of something that's organic against something else. So they'll carbon date something, like they'll find like a fossil, and if they'll compare the elements to something else that is living and organic to see how much of a match it is. So what they found is that the in those black women, those placentas of those Black American women, they had the highest match with the oldest carbon dating. But what they did was, based on race science, they allocated those women's DNA to Africa. You know what I'm saying? But it was carbon dated against an American environment. So that's the farthest back I got back to when they started to set haplogroups. And when you think about it, it's one big contradiction. They've already kind of like admitted that, like Maroc said, that you can't relegate skin tones and phenotypes and physical characteristics to certain landmass. That's just impossible. So when they do your DNA, it's, I think people kind of, they don't think about it clearly, but I think they kind of have this thing in their head where they're gonna take a scoop of dirt or the land, you know what I'm saying, and put it in a machine, and then put your blood in the machine, and it'll like tell you if you're from that soil. No, that's not how it works. So the haplogroup thing is very shady. It's really not science.
Absolute. And X, you had a response to that real quick, real quick.
No response,
Okay.
bro. Because like I said, I'm still learning. I just wanted to ask for some research, for some resources on where I can learn more about the haplogroups and how they're like manipulating them.
I'll add you to my group that we talk about, so you can ask those questions, and we'll give you the correct information. Um,
Yeah, appreciate it.
absolute.
Yeah, I don't know if it went up there because I don't see it, but I'm trying to add a thread that I have right now, because also just to bring it all together, haplogroups are they're tied to, I don't know if you guys ever seen when they do those ancestry testing, they have Y-DNA and mtDNA. So those are mapped to haplogroups too, and if you do research on that, you see that they kind of force a lot of stuff. So I put up a thread about that too.
Yes, absolute. Um, and again, either way, we're talking about DNA. They all would have been black either way. And a mutation uh, doesn't really require somebody to be indigenous to a particular landmass, like I said. But one thing I wanted to make clear also was that since we were talking about Lucia women, why not talk about Kennewick man? So Kennewick man is the oldest skeleton or skull that they found in North America. They, if you look and Google it, they'll tell you that Kennewick Man is Native American. That's incorrect. Was he American? Yes, but when we're talking about classifications of morphological association, they try to say he's a red Native American. No. In fact, the scientists and the Native Americans that were trying to claim him. They were sued successfully because of them finding out they were lying about it. They were going into the scientific databases and manipulating the data and lying about it in favor of Native Americans, and they were sued because of it. So they come to find out that they tried to say that the DNA was damaged, but it came through a reading successfully once, and but it never came through successfully. They just gave them the credit. Once they were sued, I don't know what happened between that time. The Native Americans had a hold of the skull. They took the skull. They buried it in an undisclosed location, and that location has not been revealed. So no one has yet to get and retrieve the skull. Maybe by systematic design, to retrieve it so that they can find out exactly uh, what morphology the skull really pertains to. And of course, uh, if it's as old as that, like I said, UNESCO and NCBI already verified the fact that anything that old would have been black. Kennewick Man was black, and they just decided to lie for Native Americans and make him white because they didn't want to disturb their origin story. Bunch of lies. So you can Google Kennewick Man sued if you want to do that to verify it. Um, but let me just get to what I said in response to that directly to your thread. Um, I said that uh, the Native American grift is hijacked to include foreigners. Reasons why Asia and South America are deliberately pseudo proxied as belonging to Native American groups in DNA algorithms. The membership inclusion is I'm Native American and I say so, and they don't use DNA. And this is why ICE has been detaining them because there is a lot of foreigners that have made their way into tribal Native American tribes. In that way, these are $5 Indians, pretendians, if you will. Jubilee, you got something on that?
Yeah, I wanted to get to that because I think what's the mainstream may be missing that people will never really connect because of what the mainstream already offers is that the reason these people are able to kind of like hide themselves amongst these Native American enclaves is because of the history where these tribes have been racialized, right? And what I mean by racialized is there's been a programming that's happened across the world, or at least across America, where we believe indigenous means a certain look and phenotype.
Right.
That's very important, right? And the reason this is very important, and I think you can see in that thread too, where you responded down in the bottom. It's a part of another thread I have where there's been a couple of cases in Canada where they're starting to actually like crack down on people who have been faking lineage and faking being a part of a tribe. But the part that they don't tell you is that the only reason not the only reason, but a huge reason these people are admitted membership is because of how they look. So, like, how about, we take our black ass down there with paperwork and say, hey, look, our grandpa was on, in, so and so tribe, this role, we got this, whatever, right? I've heard I know stories of Black Americans trying to go get that tribal affiliation and have been denied for whatever reason, right? But there have been cases where people just simply come in and give something like, say, they'll look up, just randomly find someone's genealogy or something to say, oh yeah, this was my great grandmother too, whatever, and it's like, okay, you look the part, you live in the area, and you're in. And then also, I think there's another side to it where, people just kind of like homogenize because they're in the same area, and especially in such a racialized a
Yeah.
culture like America, where they just, they kind of identify with each other anyway. So it
Yeah.
is there may be some type of benefit on the other side, but I think the most important part about this is how, and I don't mean to laugh, but the most ironic and important part about all of this is that this idea, which is so unfair, that we relegate indigeneity, especially in the Americas, to one phenotype. That idea is now backfiring because people can scream all day, I'm, whatever, I'm Mexican, I'm indigenous, I'm a true Aztec, I'm whatever, right? Believe how identify however you want to identify. You may even get Native American membership and affiliation, but that does not make you a U.S. citizen. And I think that that part of that belief, that common belief of this is really their land, that's starting to fall apart because the truth is it's not. You know what I'm saying? Just on some legal stuff. So that's the part that's really interesting me. I'm wondering what's going to happen now because throughout all of this, it kind of dawned on me like, wow, these are nations. You know what I'm saying? So these people have been granting membership to their own personal nations within this nation. So I'm interested to see how it's gonna unfold.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear about what's happening here. These are Native American sovereign nations accepting people entirely based off their phenotype and nothing more. It's just I'm Native American and I say so. And meanwhile, they are removing Solon from tribal affiliation, um, despite them having papers or what have you, despite us being a part of America for thousands of years. Um, I mean, this is getting quite ridiculous. I mean, it's fine with it for what it is, but let's also be clear about. I need to repeat this again for the room for people who just came in because they are spreading. If you look at what I posted, 23andMe is compartmentalizing between three different continents for one particular DNA strand of Native Americans. Native American, the strand of DNA for Native American can be stretched between North America, South America, and Asia. That's ridiculous. And then if you look into the science of it, right, they'll tell you straight up that it's fake, it's pseudo. For Amerindian ancestors, a combination of Mayans and then Nahua natives were used as pseudo ancestors for indigenous Americans. We find that the first inhabitants of northeastern Siberia were not ancestors of either Native Americans or modern Siberians. Um, Another one here. Um, a high divergence corresponds to better informativeness. We could hypothesize that the use of AMI individuals as pseudo ancestors of Native Americans should be preferred to CHB individuals. They're talking about Native Americans and Asians. These are pseudo ancestors in which they are admitting on a wide scale. One thing I did skip over, which I wanted to get back to, if you look at a lot of these studies, this is what it says verbatim. Besides the CHB population, we are also used as proxies for African and European ancestors. For these tests, they particularly use Yoruba, Nigeria, respectively, in place of the Black Americans. Black
Now, boom,
Americans,
right there, and see right there is exactly where everything just goes from science to unethical, right?
right?
Because why are you knowing what you know about science, knowing that you can't relegate like there's no genetic differences, there are epigenetic differences amongst ethnic groups because of cultural practices and generational things, but when you go to say we're going to use a group that you have pretty probably never lived amongst as a proxy group to you,
Right.
what are you basing that on? You're simply basing it on mainstream history or one side of history, or really
Or
more so
phenotype.
ideology.
Or
Yeah,
phenotype.
just
Let's be
phenotype.
clear
Yeah,
here. If they're doing the same
right.
thing when it comes to Latin America and the Native Americans, they are basing this entire thing based off phenotype and not actual DNA. Because if the S and Ps were replicated the same, then Black Americans would have their own ethnic S and Ps. We wouldn't have to look to
Exactly.
Africa
Right.
for that.
I,
Meanwhile,
I,
meanwhile, you realize that uh, on the continent of Africa, there's a slew of different S&Ps that are different from one another. S&Ps from Nigeria are different from the ones in Angola, or the ones that are different from Cameroon, or the ones that are different from Seychelles.
but you know what though? What's funny is it's depending on the database of the company, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, there are some companies that go by tribe. They don't. They kind of they pride themselves on going outside of the quote unquote colonial lines, right?
Right.
And get down into the tribe. But I just wanted to read something right quick
But
that is from the white pages of Ancestry.com. So they're right now they're a public company, right? So that means they're obligated to show the sciences behind and the processes behind their business. So they even say right in their white papers when it comes to the process, it says reference panel candidates and from admixed populations. In some parts of the world, indigenous people may carry DNA from populations originated from continents other than their own. Hmm.
Mhm.
For example, people of Amerindian descent in North and South America may also have some ancestry from Europe or in Africa. When creating reference panels reflecting geographic regions for the Americas and Oceania, we wanted to use only the parts of the genome with ancestry from the indigenous populations.
Mhm.
We did this by looking at our previous ethnicity assignments and choosing only the segments of DNA or windows where both chromosomes had an assignment to, and it kind of got off there. But basically, they're telling you
Right.
that they're kind of like warning you, like, hey, look, if there's any discrepancy, if something don't look right, American Indian can have Europe and African blood too. Like what? It's just all contradicting. It's pseudo.
All I heard was we're going by phenotype. That's what I heard.
Exactly.
That's what the fuck I heard.
Exactly. Yep.
We're selecting this. Yes, we might have found this, that, and the third, but we're going to select this because these people look similar to what the idea of what we visualize a Native American to be. That's all they're saying, and they do the same thing with us. Meanwhile, all these African groups are coming up inadequate to Black Americans. These people aren't replications of us. So we have to be clear about what they're doing here in these scientific databases. They're going
And
by these phenotypes. Go ahead.
no, well, I was just gonna say, just to real quick to what you just said. We're not the same as African. Is no dig to anybody else, but the truth is, what happened was they racialized us. There's kind of like two prongs to this, right? They racialized us, right, under this thing called black, and then this thing called black is associated to Africa, right? So all of the greatness and all of the cultural innovation that we have over time has somehow been dislocated towards Africa. You know what I'm saying? So this basis of pseudoscience has even had a cultural impact, that we are now trying to undo with real science.
Right. But also, like, how is it that we are the same as you genetically when you're not even the same as yourselves on your own damn continent? We're not the same as you across the damn ocean. Y'all got different DNA S&Ps on your own damn continent, and somehow we're the same as you across the ocean.
And what's crazy is it's pretty much only it's only kind of like targeted towards us, right?
Right.
Even I think there was a commercial, there was an ancestry.com commercial where it showed, like, this enslaved black woman running away with this white guy, and it was like, find your story out. And so they gear this stuff towards us pretty much. It's big business.
Right. No, it is big business. You know why? Because it is much better to for them anyway to have this fantasy that that there were denegro barriers or genetic or racialized barriers across the globe. How or a utopia of Native Americans over here, a utopia of Asians over here, a utopians of Africans only at the sub-Saharan level. And then once you reach above the sub-Saharan level, then it's a bunch of uh Arabs. Yeah, you see how that works? And then the white people are only in Europe and because of the cold climate. And like it's a fantasy and it's a bunch of bullshit that a lot of us really do believe in that fantasy of it all. It's a Disney movie if you was to imagine it. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, it reminds me. I was in Spain, and one time, and we did like this tour of like this monastery and stuff, and they had, like, like these pictures of, this wasn't even a religious figure from the Bible. This is like somebody who they regard as, like, I can't remember who it was, but to be honest, but it's someone that they regard as, someone prominent in their history. And on the pictures, he has very dark skin, like damn near black. And the tour guide took it upon herself to say, but it was from the soot of the fire in the cave where he was, because Spain had no slavery, so he wasn't black.
Mm,
So So not so back in the day, I didn't realize it was that that serious. But then I thought, I'm like, wait, so they have to be a slave in order to be from here?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So that goes back to the whole idea that only this phenotype can be from this landmass. Which is crazy.
Yeah, they've definitely built a fantasy in regards to how humans work or humans are um, to have access to a landmass. And I think it looks very stupid um, on Africans in particular, to be honest, unfortunately, because, I mean, let's be clear about history. They're the first to have boats. And the fact that you couldn't utilize your boats before the man just to travel across to South America, or the ones that are in Europe, or the Moors that just they couldn't travel to they decided not to travel despite having all those boats, not to go and explore, and wait until the men to do it. That makes no y'all are insane. So it makes y'all look a lot more stupid than anything. That you believe that you weren't capable enough until after the man came up with the idea to do it, and the man doesn't have ancient history.
Yeah, and that's why I you know, it's funny because just coming from a pretty general pro black standpoint, I feel like we don't want to say bad things about Africa because it seems like we kind of like have that, just it's almost like culturally significant to kind of give homage to Africa in a sense. But
Mm.
when you think about a pre-colonial Africa where it's like, oh, everything was happiness and we were stolen and this and that, that kind of infantilizes the people of that time to the point where it
So
almost looks makes them look like they're hopeless. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
I'd much rather believe I'd much rather believe it was a business and these people just got fucked out of the business and they didn't see it
Well, what do
coming.
you mean believe? They were sold. Part of the ancestry was
Well,
sold.
right. Yeah, no. That you're right. That's pretty much it. Like, I mean, if I'm saying for them, for those who aren't going to actually research, wouldn't it make more sense to, what I'm saying, if you're just going to go on belief anyway, it's not logical. But it's just it when we go with this narrative that, oh, Africa is the way it is because of invaders and they came here and did this, it, like I said, it kind of like it sounds handicapped.
Right.
Like, okay, with that being said, things are never going to heal. So I don't know. That's just not. I don't know. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna start to end it soon, but there's just too much information um, that would codify the fact that they were black well after they've stepped foot into America. I think the oldest footprints they found over here in America was like 22,000 years old. They say we probably reached America about 30,000 years ago. You really think anybody wasn't black 30,000 years ago, 22,000 years ago? Everybody was morphologically and black and had melanin. That's just what it was. And to pretend that's not the case is kind of illogical. We have too many things that would codify that as well. Outside of just that, we also have um, bottle gourds that traveled from one place to another. So we see people who are traveling as well. We also see dog migrations because dogs follow us. They were companions of us for a very long time. So these are migrations of people that um, and also even with the dog stuff as well, I can probably send a study. Uh, the dogs have their own particular DNA as well, and so they will talk about how that particular dog's DNA changed from African to more of a European to more of a Asiatic or whatever, based off of um, the origin point of certain dogs and how they could have mated at one point or another. But I don't know. It's all interesting things, but um, to back to our point when it comes to the ICE and the Native Americans, um, yeah, they're rounding them up because we just have a bunch of pretendians all in one place.
Yeah, and one point, another point that I wanted to make was what's so funny and ironic about this idea of pretending, right? So I don't know what's the origin of it, but they call Black Americans pretendians a lot. Like I think that we get called that from a few different groups, right? Um, we even get called it
More
from
recently.
yeah, more recently I'd say probably so, yeah. But what's funny is a Black American more than likely would not be um be the one faking lineage to be admitted into a you know what I'm saying, into a tribe because it's already hard anyway. But meanwhile, they base it pretty much on phenotype, and they just let anyone in, and it is actually is backfired, and it's about to probably fall apart. And just for I see a couple. What's good, Actify? Just for a couple of people that just got in the room, we were talking about the situation where Native Americans are being uh, pretty much detained by ICE, and the truth of the matter is they um, they very well could be undocumented immigrants who have tribal affiliation. So just because you have Native American tribal affiliation doesn't mean you automatically are, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So it's funny because everyone does kind of go along with this narrative that okay, yeah, Mexican or Latin American people, whatever, they are indigenous, right? But that narrative doesn't actually um, it doesn't translate to anything material. You know what I'm saying, or legislative, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but
Basically, you can't be
the
protected just because you immigrated here recently and decided to join a Native American tribe. That's not how it works here. You're
exactly
not to be
right,
protected. You're not being protected here based off that. If you're an illegal immigrant, they are detaining you and they're sending you to ICE. So that whole tribal affiliation thing ain't gonna work here, especially when they're doing it just based off of whatever the fuck they feel like. Um, and my last point would be let's be clear about history. So long, we don't really lie about our history. Anything we talk about, it is because we've got a lot of information that codifies it. So there's no point in lying about our history or being illogical about it. If there are things that are pointing towards it, um, yeah, it just makes a lot more sense for us to be a part of it, if not in the total um, creator or innovator about it. Whenever they want to pretend that you know other people are involved in our stuff, you have to question that. Whenever our stuff is about us and they're saying we're the innovators of it, we're the innovators of barbecue, we're the innovators of the light bulb or whatever, what have you. No, I don't believe Alexander Graham Bell had anything to do with it because what's the whole entire point of lighting a light bulb without the actual light? And that was through, of course, Lewis Latimer. They like to give little bits of credit to other people. Meanwhile, these other people um, that you want to involve in, we were never really largely getting involved or on good terms with them in the first place for us to have collaborations with. Um, but my last point is that Black Americans could never be pretendians because we're not historically recognized as pretendians. You look at any type of historical article, we are never referenced. It is always white people or other people like Asians and other South Americans. Black Americans are never referenced as pretendians, and if you can find that, you can go ahead and email me. You can find me. Any last words?
yeah. I just wanted to say appreciate the space, but hopefully we can get into it again because
Absolute.
I really wanted to get into the possibility of because there's a lot more reports behind this whole thing because since these
Okay, we can
people
do a part
are
two.
able. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because this is there's more of a political edge to it that I think not to sensationalize, of course, but it, it's it's a little deeper than what we think. Like this could be a vehicle for a whole other thing, for money laundering, trafficking, or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like these, this vessel that they've created through these tribal nations. So yeah, no, great space. Hopefully, some people can take some stuff and do their own research and share. So, yeah,
Absolute. So yeah, we'll do this again then. I'm gonna do some more information for part two, so we can really go back and forth and have a real conversation about it as well. I'm sure there's a lot more that's going to come out in the next few days about this. So patience is key as well. So I would love to do part two about this. Thank you all for coming. Check out the podcast, Soulaan Podcast.